just joining us, please go to the chat box and introduce yourself with your name and the region you represent. As a reminder, this office hours session is being recorded for public record. A copy of the slide deck and recording will be emailed to all attendees. Next slide, please. How to ask a question. All questions must be submitted in the chat box. Please type your question into the chat box. The team will read the questions out loud at the end of the presentation and will provide answers, if possible, throughout the presentation. All questions and answers entered into the chat box will be recorded as part of the public record. Alongside our presenters, we also have several HCD staff, including ESG CV representatives, ESG CV grant administrators, and other consultants who are able to answer questions during the Q&A session. Next slide, please. Today's office hours session agenda includes the following: announcements, ESG CV updates, office hours update, ESG CV Q&A, spotlight session, diversity, and CoC leadership. Next slide. And now I will hand it over to Connie for ESG updates.
Good morning, everybody. 2022 ESG NOFN applications. We had a little bit of a delay, but they will be released here in the next couple weeks. Just be a little bit more patient with us. The webinars, at this time, we had scheduled June 7th, next Tuesday, for our Balance of State and Continuum of Care webinars. We may have to move that out. I will let those who have registered, if we do that, we will go in and send you an email through the Eventbrite. So right now, we do plan on the 2022 NOFN applications to be released within the next week or two. And again, for those that have registered already for the June 7th webinars, we may have to push those out just a little bit, but you will be notified. 2021 ESG contracts, they are still routing. We have several of them that are routing internally. Some grantees have already received notification through eCivis of their award, and they will need to sign that. It's called the STD 213. It's that standard agreement. We need your signature, and then it will go back through eCivis for our contracts office to sign. We hope to get all your 2021 contracts signed and executed by the end of July. That is our goal, and we're working very hard to make that goal for you. 2020, those that have 2020 contracts, please let us know if you're not going to be able to spend. Reach out to your rep. That date is getting closer. It's already, we're just a month away. It's July 7th is the expenditure deadline, and there are no extensions at this time. So reach out to your reps. Or if it's just, you're just not, if you're still gathering invoices, that's fine. Just always want to remind everybody that date is coming fast. Next slide, please. We've talked about this several times, and I'm just going to keep this slide up to remind everybody, because for the ESG annual program, this is still a little bit new. We have our secure site for you to drop your any backup documentation we may ask for, any kind of monitoring. We are also asking our 2020 grantees to put their request for funds and the detailed expense reports also into their secure site folder. Again, even when you do that, please don't provide any personal information for your clients. Let's everybody get used to putting just HMIS or some kind of unique identifying number whenever you're sending information to us. If we've asked for any kind of backup, like a lease or any kind of security, anything that would, where you would have client's personal information, be sure you're redacting that even when you drop it into that secure site. And if you have not received information about our secure site, please reach out as soon as possible to your ESG rep or send an email to our NOFA box, and we'll be sure to get you set up with If you haven't had a chance, you get a little bit of time today, go visit our the Housing and Community Development website, and then go to our ESG webpage. We've got a new look. Our website, our HCD website, has been updated over the last few months. And the ESG webpage, we had the good fortune that our HUD consultants have helped write and provided for us some policies and procedures for various subjects. We already have our homelessness prevention manual, our personal identifying information policies and procedures, and our FMR and rent reasonableness checklist are already out on our ESG webpage under the resource tab. And also, as you get into that ESG webpage, there are some big icons. One says notice of funding availability, another says apply, another says awards. Just start, if everybody gets a chance to go out and look at that new look and get used to seeing what we're trying really hard to post some great stuff for you out there in resources. Next slide, please. Again, this is our ESG team. We're here for you. And as we start getting ready for those 2022 NOFAs and applications which are in eCivis. And I just saw a chat come in, I think, from Ben. Yes, the resolution templates I've already put out there. You go to the ESG webpage, and there's an icon that says Notice of Funding Availability. Just click on that icon, and I've already put both resolution templates for 2022 there. I don't have any NOFAs yet, and but please, if you're planning to apply, you can start working on your resolutions now, and those templates are available for you. And again, we're here for you, happy to help. And our ESG NOFA box is where you can always reach us. And that's all I have for today.
Next slide, please. Thank you so much, Connie. Now I have just a few ESG CV updates and reminders. In order to meet HUD's 50% expenditure deadline in June, please submit an RFF to your grant administrator via email by June the 2nd. Please include as many expenses as possible. Also, as Connie mentioned, you must redact all client personal identifying information in your backup documentation. This includes names, addresses, and etc. Any RFF submissions with client PII will be returned for changes. Next slide, please. Upcoming office hours topics. On 6/8, authentic engagement of persons with lived experience. On 6/15, housing problem solving. On 6/22, documentation clinic. On 6/29, coordinated entry system clinic. Next slide, please. Here we have the COVID response resources. The links will be in the slides when emailed. Next slide, please. ESG resource links. These links will also be in the slides when emailed. Next slide. At this time, if there are any questions, please put them in the chat and you may continue to throughout the presentation. Okay, if there are no questions, next slide, please. How to contact us. If you have any further questions, please contact us. Annual ESG, please reach out to your ESG representative or esg@hcd.ca.gov. And for ESG CV, please reach out to your grant administrator. Next slide, please. And now I will hand it over to Chris Pitcher for today's Spotlight Series presentation on diversity in CoC leadership.
Thank you, Shavana, and thanks everyone for being with us this morning. Today, our Spotlight Series presentation is going to focus on diversity in CoC leadership. I am very Pleased to have with us Masita Doyley from ICF and also Gordon Levine from ICF, who will walk us through today's presentation. Remember that the Spotlight series is meant to be interactional, so we do have a good deal of slides to get through today, but we're going to leave time to have question and answer. We're going to have time, hopefully, for you to come off mute if you'd like to talk with us verbally, ask your question, raise your hand. So we are to the relaxed portion of the Spotlight series. So put questions in the chat while we're talking. Once the presentation is over, feel free to talk with us directly. With that, I'm going to hand it to Gordon to kick us off today's Spotlight series presentation. Gordon.
Good, thank you, Chris. Good afternoon, everyone. Good morning, everyone. My name is Gordon Levine. My pronouns are he, him, and I am a homeless services specialist and TA provider with ICF. Masita, would you like to introduce yourself briefly?
Sure. Thank you, Gordon. Hi, everyone. My name is Masita Doyley. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm also a senior homeless service specialist with ICF. So glad to be online with you all today.
Thank you, Masita. We're really excited to be here today to talk to you all about diversity in CoC leadership. So a little bit of background. Well, first, a little bit of business. We have several polls coming up in this presentation. You'll have an opportunity to plug in your answer. I'll remind you when we get there. The polls are an opportunity both for us to get a pulse check on how you all are doing, but also to test your knowledge and see where you are with everything. Please note that your answers are anonymous. We get an aggregate sort of how many people answered this question in this way, but your answers are anonymous, in addition to which all of them have the not sure option. So we encourage you, if you are not sure, to be honest and just let us know that you're not sure where you are. That's always okay. Masita and I introduced ourselves as homeless services specialists with ICF, which is true and important and the reason that we're here today. But in addition to that, I would also identify to you all that I am Jewish, that I am queer, and that I have a disability, an invisible disability. I was diagnosed 10 years ago with post-traumatic stress disorder. And so I highlight all of those both because they're things that are just, they're part of me. They touch on every aspect of my work, but because they're specifically relevant to the question of diversity. And the way that we want to frame this today for you is that diversity really isn't about trying to collect something of everything. And it's not really about a narrow concept of what diversity looks like. It's really more about recognizing who is in the room and identifying representation for those populations, either of people served or people who are serving, and then ensuring that that representation isn't tokenistic, is meaningful, while also recognizing that an individual person, regardless of their level of experience or knowledge, can't possibly represent an entire group. And so we're going to talk to you about strategies for achieving a more diverse CoC leadership, rather than providing you a specific roadmap toward these are the 3 boxes you have to check. Next slide, please. Okay, we really have divided this into 4 sections. Governance structure, which really talks about how CoCs are generally set up. Diversity matters, why it matters, and to whom it matters. And spoiler, it's everyone on this call. Best practices for implementing a more diverse leadership structure in your CoC at every level. And finally, some specific considerations around victim services providers, especially in relation to large or rural communities. Next slide, please. Okay, so I've got our first section on governance structure. Next slide, please. So we're going to go into our first poll on the anatomy, what we're calling the anatomy of a CoC. So CoCs are composed of many agencies and individual people, and these people in these agencies often wear many different hats. Which of the following on your screen is not a required part of a CoC's governance structure? If we can put the poll up there, we're going to give you about 30 seconds to answer. Which of these is not a required part of a CoC's governance structure? Is it the CoC board? Is it the CoC's committees, subcommittees, and working groups? Is it the CoC's general membership? Or is it the CoC collaborative applicant? Or are you not sure? Also okay. And this is a tricky one in case anyone is feeling like stumped. This is tricky even if you've been in the CoC business a minute. All right, that's about 30 seconds. Can we see the results? Okay, great. This is really good. So about a 30 you said not sure, about a 30 you said option 4, and the rest of you are kind of split between options 2 and 3. So can we see option 4, please? Give that a click. Fair enough. So if we could pop back slide, thank you. The correct answer is, of course, option 4. Congratulations to the third of you who got that right. Great job. Collaborative applicants are technically not part of the CoC's governance structure. While the collaborative applicant, which is sometimes incorrectly called the lead agency, plays a significant role in CoC operations, and while they're often assigned governance responsibilities, CoCs are not required to incorporate them into the CoC's governance structure, by which we mean its decision-making structure, any more than it incorporates any other CoC participating agency. Next slide, please. So the anatomy of a CoC. First part, the CoC as a whole is composed of, including but not limited to, CoC program recipients, so organizations that are funded, other homeless services providers that don't receive CoC funding, so ESG funded, PATH funded, publicly funded, not funded at all. Other key stakeholders, so to be everything from other systems of care to local governments to concerned citizen agencies, and all the way down to people with lived experience who have direct experience with the systems that all of those other folks we talked about are funding, supporting, and operating. Next slide, please. The CoC is everyone in the community who is working to end homelessness. It doesn't matter if you call them a member, it doesn't matter if you don't call them a member, it doesn't matter any of those things. From HUD's perspective, from what a CoC ought to be, it's all of us together. Give us another click, please. Very good. So within the CoC, the gut is really its governance structure, its committees, and its board. And those are really the two core decision-making entities insofar as they have explicit authority granted to them to the CoC program interim rule, and really goes board and then committees most of the time. Give that a click, please. The collaborative applicant, as we said, but also the HMIS lead are not inherently part of the CoC governance structure, even though they often have significant roles to play in operations. Give us another click, please. And then within the governance structure itself, as we said, are committees. And we've given you some examples. Coordinated entry committees are pretty common, so are HMIS committees. And so are subpopulation specific committees, veterans, youth, and victim services providers. Those are all very common committees. But there's nothing in the CoC program interim rule that says you can't develop committees that suit your CoCs. Some CoCs make sense of a coordinated entry committee, some have referral committees. HMIS committees might make sense in some, HMIS governance committees might make sense in others. Governance and membership committees make sense some places. Certain subpopulations make sense here, but not necessarily there. And this is really the first taste of like, how do we make sure that our committee structure is actually representative of both the organizations that are doing the work and the people that we're actually serving our population. Give us another click. As I said, CoCs really create committees in whatever ways make sense to them, and that can change over time, and it's usually defined in the governance charter. Next slide, please. I think I already covered that one, actually. Next slide, thank you. And finally, we have the board. And the board does have a titular responsibility. It is given decision-making authority by the CoC program interim rule. It has a number of responsibilities like signature authority. And generally speaking, it is in some way representative of the folks that it's governing, including special interest groups, people with lived experience, and CoC program and ESG recipients. Give that a click, please. Again, the board composition and authority is also up to each CoC. For some CoCs, it makes a lot of sense to have a board with a lot of strong central authority, especially new CoCs that need that strong central guidance. Older, more established CoCs or CoCs with strong, diverse representation among service providers often have boards with less authority or that have a lot of authority, but it's vested in individual members. Give us another click, please. Finally, let's talk about the collaborative applicant of the HMIS lead. So the collaborative applicant, according to the CoC program interim rule, its basic responsibility is to develop the consolidated application, which is the CoC's annual application for CoC program funding. It manages the day-to-day operations of the CoC, and it often, but doesn't always and doesn't have to, play a leadership role in the CoC. And that's going to be defined, again, by your governance charter, which is really your CoC's operating manual. On the flip side, the HMIS lead maintains the CoC's HMIS database, and maintain is really broad and includes training and technical assistance to HMIS users. It also includes assessing and ensuring that data is healthy and well produced. The HMIS lead is also often, but again, not always, responsible for annual reporting on everything from the point in time count, the housing inventory chart, the LSA, and all of those other annual reports that are due to HUD. You'll note though on the slide that that's a pretty short list of responsibilities. Some of them are a little vague and they can contain a lot of actions, but really those entities, while they often play an outsized role in operating and managing a CoC, they don't have to. That's a decision CoCs can make. Next slide, please. Over to you, Masita.
Thank you, Gordon. And so what we're going to do right now is do another pulse check for our poll number 2. Which should be showing up on your screen. If you can take a moment to answer the following question: should CoC boards should be diverse and representative of the CoC providers, participant population, and key stakeholders? Which of the following is not a requirement for CoC boards? Option 1, must be created and formed according to written process developed by the CoC. Option 2, must be representative of the participant population served by the CoC. Option 3, must be representative of the CoC's participating agencies and homeless service projects. Or option 4, must include at least one person who is experiencing homelessness or formerly experienced homelessness. We're not sure. If you want to take a moment, give it a second. I will not do the Jeopardy song. There we go. All right. And it looks like option 3, where folks felt that it was a little bit of a tricky question. Option 3, must be representative of the participating agency and homeless service providers. The actual answer, if you could go to the next slide, is actually it's option 2. CoC boards are not required by the CoC program interim rule to be representative of the participants that the CoC serve. It's a little bit tricky when you're thinking of population versus projects. While they must include at least one person with lived experience of homelessness, there's no requirement that CoCs account for the specific characteristics of its participant population on its board. Its CoC value equitable representation. If CoC does value equitable representation, then you can make that decision to take the necessary actions yourselves. Next slide. But HUD does have 3 interim rules that kind of feeds off the previous slide and what the governance structure of a CoC should have in place. The first rule is communities must adopt and follow a written process to select a board to act on behalf of the continuum of care. That process must be reviewed, updated, and approved by the CoC at least once every 5 years. Next, CoC must appoint additional committees, subcommittees, and work groups. This is important as usually this is where the work is accomplished. And Gordon previously in the anatomy of a CoC slide showed some different examples of a committee, which can include HMIS, coordinated entry, governance, system performance, veterans, and so on. And finally, the CoC board must be represented of the relevant organizations and of projects serving homeless population and subpopulations in the CoC geographic area. That goes in alignment with the poll question that was previously asked. And the difference is that it must represent the organizations and the projects, not specifically the population. The CoC board must also include at least one homeless or formerly homeless individual. Next slide. And this is also familiar with the anatomy structure that was previously shared, in that there are different 3 specific areas regarding CoC generic governance structure. Starts with your board, which are this group generally gives the final approvals and at times may provide oversight for a collaborative applicant, as well as the HMIS lead. Committees are the working body of the CoC, essentially where all the work happens in a specific area. And they also provide specific oversight as well. Sometimes it could be as coordinated entry, it could be over HMIS, it could as well be within the system performance and evaluation regarding your grant application process. And then we have general membership. General membership is essentially a representation of all local residents and or agencies who have an interest in resolving homelessness. And the general membership working body, right, helps to approve charter, votes for representation on the board, and also general membership can volunteer on different committees. Next slide. Now we're gonna kind of dive into why within the anatomy of a CoC leadership structure, why does diversity matter and how it can benefit your CoC. Next slide. Now, question number 3, because we love to do polls. So let's pause for a moment if we could have the option up to answer the question. Which of the following is not a representation of a primary characteristic of diversity? It's a little bit tricky. So option 1, race. Option 2, gender identity. Option 3, education. Option 4, age. And you can also be not sure. Okay. Take a second. All right, the results. Option 3, oh, very good. It's not as tricky as we thought, Gordon. Very good. So option 3 it is, education. Next slide. And the reason being is because there are 2 different characteristics regarding diversity. The primary characteristics of diversity are usually the most visible. For example, they could be gender, race, sexual orientation, age, although that may not be appearance sometimes. The visibility of primary characteristics is critical to the assumptions made by the majority society about the presumed worth of minority group members. The values and judgment assigned to these attributes by the majority group may determine whether minority group members are accepted as full participants. For example, my primary characteristic is I am a female, I identify as Black, and my age, we're going to let that remain hidden. And secondary characteristics are identified by way of experience. Secondary characteristics such as family status, education, income, and communication style are vital in shaping one's educational and career trajectories. Secondary characteristics for human agencies and choice really have an influential and more variable and less defining, although not always as like similar like the primary characteristics. In structurally inequitable societies where access to opportunity is not equal across population, personal choice and secondary characteristics is not always fully realized. Next slide. And why does this matter? Why does how you may physically look or how you identify truly matter? Well, diversity in any dimension matters in these 4 key areas. It can include respect, appreciate, to understand, and to acknowledge, right? Diversity is any dimension that can be used to differentiate groups and people from one another. In a nutshell, it's about empowering people by respecting and appreciating what makes them different in terms of age, gender, ethnicity, religion, disability, sexual orientation, education, and national origin. Diversity allows for the exploration of these differences in a safe, positive, and nurturing environment. It means understanding one another by surpassing simple tolerance to ensure people truly value their differences. This allows everyone to both embrace and also celebrate the rich dimensions of diversity contained within each individual and place positive value on diversity in the community and within the workforce. Each individual in this organization within the CoC brings with them a diverse set of perspective, work, and life experience, as well as cultural differences. So the power of diversities can only be unleashed and its benefit reaped when we recognize these differences and learn to respect and value each individual relevant of their background. Next slide. So I like to share a quote which says, diversity is an action, inclusivity is cultural, and belonging is a feeling. Change doesn't start from top-down leadership. It happens at every level. Diversity happens at every level because it really truly matters in ending homelessness. Efforts to address homelessness must lead with equity and be accountable to and inclusive of those experiencing homelessness. An inclusive approach means involving a diverse group of people experiencing homelessness in policymaking, program planning, and service delivery efforts in order to represent the diverse identities and experiences of the homeless population. Integrating racial equity into system modeling and resource allocation is both an innovation in homeless system planning and a fundamental requirement to end homelessness. I think, within the activities within the recent years, this really is truly a high priority in helping with improving our system. So that everyone is invited to be at the table at different levels, and having that diversity of stakeholders involved at different levels, whether they're decision-making, whether they're planning, whether they're evaluating, is truly a valuable asset that as a CoC, one can integrate within your governance structure to make sure that that's in place. Next slide. And when you look to integrate it within your CoC systems, right, you can ensure that your continuum of care can include diversity in various ways, such as reviewing and existing and proposed CoC policies and practice, recommending strategies to increase representation from diverse stakeholders. You can issue recommendations to improve equitable outcomes for all populations served through the local homeless response system to the CoC board. Collaborating with collaborative applicant and HMIS lead to issue periodic reports on efforts to address equity and inclusivity within the homeless response system is really a great strategy, because it kind of opens the way to your CoC having a continuous feedback process, in where you are able to, you open the door for not just activity to be done, but for those who are in partnership with your CoC, whether they're on the board within general membership or in the subcommittee or hold specific roles, to provide their input based on their current, whether it's professional or personal experiences. Next slide. Diversity matters within the Department of California HCD. And we know that soon that there will be an ESG manual coming soon, which shall share several ways on how ESG subrecipients can include diversity in their leadership structure. One, you are able to require ESG subrecipients to have at least one person with lived experience on its board of directors or equivalent policy-making entity. I know some may say, well, why does this keep repeating itself? And the reason of having someone with lived experience is truly, truly important, because the level of perspective that is brought to the table for someone who may be currently navigating within the homeless service response system or have navigated within the homeless service response system is a value add to help with system improvement, because it comes from an angle that does not provide itself to those who are maybe professional, and it still could be a very, very good knowledge sharing and partnership information. You can also outline racial equity goals for each ESG prototype, including staffing, leadership, and accountability. You are able to specify that ESG subrecipient must consult with people with lived experience to determine disparities of accessibility issues, along with many access such as age, ethnicity, disability, gender identity, sexual orientation, and family composition. Next slide. And I think, Gordon, that is, yep.
All right, thank you very much, Masita. That was great. So it's my privilege to talk about best practices in diverse leadership. Let's go to the next slide. So last poll, it is not TBD, it has been D. There are 6 recommendations that serve as a guide for individuals charged with leading collaborative networks. These are identified as critical in a CoC homeless network service collaboration. Which of the following is not a representation of a primary characteristic? I think we've got a small poll issue there. There are 6 recommendations that serve as guides for individuals charged with leading collaborative networks. They're critical to a CoC homeless services network collaboration. Which of the following is not a critical element of a CoC collaborative network? Which of these is not a critical element of leading a CoC or of participating in the CoC network collaboration? Again, it's okay to not be sure. And we've got a little bit of wording error on the poll, so just focus on the thing we're asking. Poll's going to be up another 15 seconds or so. Which of these is not a key recommendation to leading a CoC or leading in your CoC's collaborative network? Okay, polls down. A clear 2/3 of you said option 4, being assertive and charismatic. You're absolutely correct. That is not one of the recommendations that is key to your CoC leadership. Next slide, please. So these are the 6 recommendations that serve as a guide for folks who are charged with leading collaborative networks like a CoC. Any given CoC has identified them as critical to establishing and maintaining the network. And they are, number 1, developing expertise. Number 2, cultivating a collaborative culture or culture of collaboration. Number 3, taking risks. Number 4, being an inclusive leader. Number 5, being agile and adaptive. The adaptive part requires agility. The agile part requires adaptivity. And number 6, using performance indicators effectively, which means engaging with your data, whether it's quantitative or qualitative. Next slide, please. So as an overview for best practices, these top 2 points are really where I live in these slides. The first one is that people aren't collectibles. Whenever people talk about diversity in organizations, I always get afraid that they're thinking about baseball cards, which dates me slightly, I think. But leadership doesn't increase in value when you arbitrarily add whatever more diversity means. Really, your goal is to focus on participation and leadership from groups that are accessing services and groups that are providing services. And incidentally, that's taken almost wholesale for something Masita said to me a few weeks ago. Absolutely the best thing I've heard about diversity and CoC leadership in like a year. Participation at every level of the CoC needs to be meaningful. And meaningful means enabling people to both contribute now, so bring to the table what they have, and to grow into other leadership roles. One of the things that drives me absolutely bonkers up the wall is when CoCs look at their representation requirement for their board and says, okay, we have to have somebody who's got lived experience on our board. They, right, whoever they is, don't really have the ability or the capacity to contribute in any meaningful way other than like being the token person with lived experience. And so we're not going to give them any real responsibility or any of the crunchy stuff. Like we're not going to ask them to do pit count stuff. We're not going to ask them to do AHAR stuff. What we're going to ask them to do is whenever we have an idea about homelessness, we want to run it by them so they give it a cultural lens on it, which is valuable, but very limited. It's also condescending because the reality is that people with lived experience have tremendous capacity. I was very lucky in my former life that our CoC had 2 consecutive people with lived experience who were really data interested and participated in a really meaningful way on all of our data reporting. That was unusual. We went after it, and there's a reason that it was there. Finally, every level of governance really should have many different voices. And we're talking the board, we're talking committees, we're talking the general membership, which means a process of continual outreach to stakeholders who are new or who aren't yet fully invested in the CoC. And what I mean by that is it means reaching out outside your CoC to the folks who aren't yet at the table, but it also means that recognizing that people who are at the table, some of them are just checking the box, and some of them don't know why they're in the room. And some of them don't feel capable of speaking up, or they don't know how to speak up, or they don't know why they would speak up. And so there's this, and I know that this is buzzy, so please bear with me. There's a continual improvement process at work in cultivating your CoC stakeholders. And it's not just, are they here or are they not? It's, are they not here? Are they here, but they don't know why? Are they here and they know why, but they don't participate? Are they here, but they participate, but not well? Are they here and they're fired up about it? And that's a continuum that folks from organizations to individual people move along and need to be shepherded along ongoingly. Next slide, please. Thank you for the kind words in the chat. Again, most of them are Masita's, to be honest with you. So this is really a roadmap. Back over to Masita, please.
Gordon, you can feel free to take it. It is really, so this is the roadmap for diverse leadership. And what we wanted to do was just highlight specific areas that could really help pave the way regarding diversity. So the 4 are data collection and review, having equitable representation, ensuring access to CoC operations, and making sure your mission statement is a robust, comprehensive statement that's representative of where you're headed regarding diversity. Next slide. Okay, so data and review really is beneficial to your CoC because it provides information of, with what Gordon just said, who is accessing service, right? Because you kind of already know who's providing services based on who's at the table. But having that knowledge of who's accessing service, where they're exiting, is really beneficial. And then knowing how to conduct your outreach process and who you would like to target, or for, I want to say target, establish a formalized partnership with, right? And so there are 3 different ways you're able to do that in regards to first knowing about your baseline data, how the CoC, you can obtain your baseline data by familiarizing yourself with what Gordon mentioned earlier, the PIC count, housing inventory count, your system performance measures, process, and reports. These reports and documentation really help you as a CoC understand how the data is reported and how the outcomes are calculated to ensure how you can better understand what inequities currently are present within your system. So basically, who's missing from the table based on what you're seeing when you pull this documentation, right? And one of the tools that when I came on board in ICF, I truly really love was the CoC HUD CoC analysis tool. That helps you to, as a CoC, know whom you are serving, right? So the HUD CoC analysis tool, race and ethnicity, is really an excellent starting place to find data related to equity and homelessness within your population. It's within your community. This tool uses the PIC count and other population data to enable communities to evaluate differences in your racial and ethnic demographics of people in the general population, people in poverty, and people experiencing homelessness. And finally, you want to know your system by Stella P. So we know that Stella P uses HMIS data for analysis of demographics and system performances, and illuminating how people serve in your system and whether access, system use, and housing outcomes varies for different groups. Knowing these system pathways or how people navigate your system and how outcomes vary for different groups is important, not for resource allocation, for performance target development, and for an equitable, again, analysis in knowing who is accessing your system. And it can help identify those who are receiving services and also highlight disparities. Next slide. Okay, here we want to ensure that kind of this is like a little, imagine a little table, several tables. Who's at the table? Is there equitable representation that is at the table to help within the operations, the decision-making, the planning, and the designing of your CoC? So you're able to use this chart currently to kind of help see who is a part of your CoC, whether they're at the board level, committee level, or membership level, that are bringing different and diverse perspective and experiences to your team, and then also help identify who is missing. And when you kind of go through this process, then you're also able to develop a plan to identify and recruit members based on what you gather from who's here as a persons of lived experience, as a seniors, versus who's missing. Are we missing youth? Are we missing people living with disabilities? Are we missing people who are LGBTQ and transgender and gender expansive? You know, are we missing people from the mental health? So this kind of equitable representation you want to ensure you have within your leadership structure. Next slide. And access to CoC operations. You wanting to ensure that you review the process of how your CoC distributes and provides equitable access to information. Kind of with what Gordon alluded to previously, in that you don't want to box individuals in, those, for example, with lived experience, when you're bringing folks to the table and say, here, you are able to volunteer here, because they don't have access to the information to learn, to process, to understand. So you want to be sure that whether it's meeting agendas, whether it's reports, whether it's new information, that all have a variable access, whether it's on your website, whether it's through a shared folder, that they're able to access for review and process them within their own capacity. You want to move beyond input and advisory roles to deeper engagement and decision making. Again, Gordon was right in the fact of when you're just asking for one specific area, that kind of starts blurring into the lines of tokenism versus when you are allowing individuals to move beyond what a standard role would be and self-identify in how they would like to show up within your CoC space. Ensure geographic diversity. How does your CoC successfully represent large area? A question to ask for those who may cover multiple counties or multiple catchment areas, and ensuring that there are representation for the different landscapes, so that it's just not an imbalanced partnership that has a majority of representation from one specific geographical landscape. And you want to develop infrastructure to support success. Again, that means for individuals to feel supported internally within your CoC, will they have access to documentation? Will they have knowledge of how your meeting is organized and structured and governed prior to, regarding technology, if it's remote, if it's in person, the location and different things like that? You want to ensure that you have a sound process that is documented regarding your infrastructure to be able to share with new partners who come on as you look to increase those who are working alongside with you in your CoC structure, so that then they can make the determination based on what capacity and what access and resources they internally have and how they can participate or share with you what support they will need to continue to be involved within your CoC. Next slide. And then finally, this kind of is if you're going to be about it, say it. Nike said, just do it. So diversity is not just a word, it's action. And action starts by making the statement, right? So by reviewing your current CoC mission and determine, does it reflect how your CoC currently operates? If your mission statement does not incorporate diversity or does not reflect a representation of who's accessing your services or who's providing your services, then that may be a red flag that, hey, we may have to kind of amend our mission statements to be reviewed or to be changed so that it is truly, and it's a transformative process that we're doing and not just transactional. And so that you are truly invested in ensuring that diversity is really a part of your CoC process, and not just process, it's a part of your CoC, it's who your CoC is. And just monitor and evaluate periodically. Sometimes we get stayed or redundant within our actions. Sometimes folks may hold the positions for a long time. And so you want to monitor and evaluate periodically with who's at the table, again, who's missing from the table, and are we a reflection, right, of the changes that is taking place within our system? That's something to keep in mind as you go forth and incorporating diversity within your CoC. Next slide. Gordon.
All right, I got the last slide here, I think. So I'm going to talk, I know we're close to time. We want to leave space for questions. So we're going to talk about victim services providers as leadership real quick. This is based as much on my experience working with VSPs as anything else. There are pluses and minuses. We think there are a lot more pluses, but we do want to give you sort of the picture of both. Looking to VSPs for leadership, in rural areas, they're often the strongest agencies. They're the best staffed, they're the best funded, they might be the only ones there. They tend to be both at the agency level and the staff level, they tend to be strongly mission driven. They're there for the right reasons. They want to be there. Their leadership is often very experienced. They have a tendency to be lifers, as I think of them. And finally, the nature of VSPs require a breadth of knowledge of their system, of their services, of their geography, both within their own sort of VSP lens and more broadly in the community. On the downside, they sometimes have a knowledge gap around general homeless services. I think all of us with our DV bonus money are experiencing experiencing that lack of meshing of the gears, or that progress toward a thing. Their staff is usually stretched thin, both due to their services and due to their extracurriculars, and their leadership sometimes wears every hat at the agency. Unless they have CoC or ESG funding, fundamentally you don't have automatic buy-in from them. VSPs have a tendency to be strongly individuated in terms of having a strong organizational culture and picture of what they do. And if they don't believe that DV is part of the homeless services system, that's an argument you need to make. It's not something that's automatic in the way it would be with, for example, your local Volunteers of America affiliate that's invested in homeless services. Next slide.
Well, thank you, Gordon, and thank you, Masita, for today's presentation of diversity in CoC leadership. We can go ahead and take the slides down, Taylor. I invite you to either ask questions. We don't have any questions currently in the chat. You can ask questions. You can just come on and talk to us about diversity in CoC leadership if you wish. If you want to unmute yourself, just do so and start talking. If you raise your hand, we'll unmute you, or please do feel free to put it in the chat. Maybe to get us thinking, we can go ahead and toss something out there beyond what we've talked about, race, ethnicity. What are other subgroups or populations that you think are lacking in character, lacking in representation in your CoC? Happy to hear those as well. Got a quiet group today.
Chris, I know in my last position, one of the things we struggled with was finding a youth representative that it wasn't necessarily an issue with trying to find youth that were interested, but necessarily keeping them engaged and keeping them coming back. We would see a lot of times they'd show up to the first meeting, or show up somewhere and say, hey, here's my email, I'm totally interested to be on board, and then we'd never hear from them again. So that was something we struggled with, specifically with youth.
Yeah, thanks, Erin. That makes a lot of sense. Any comments on youth and keeping youth engaged? I think we've seen a lot of development in the youth homelessness demonstration programs, if you're part of one of those with the youth action boards or YABs, but it is definitely something we've heard as an issue before. Gordon, I see you're off mute. Anything to add?
Yeah, I'll take the low-hanging one and then kick it to Masita. The low-hanging fruit is you should stipend your participants. So when you're asking people to put the work in, you should be paying them according to the work they're doing, which is an eligible cost under your CoC planning grant. And if you have a YHDP award, it's an eligible cost under your YHDP planning grant.
Agreed. And another best practice I saw was allowing the youth to operate in their genius. A community allowed the youth to do their youth pit count. All they did, took some time and orientated the youth, and they received the best response that they've ever received when they allow them to do that. So allow them to operate in their genius and give them something, allow them to operate in a role that will create sustainable partnership, and not just putting them in where you feel that they should be operating in.
Thanks, Masita. Note here from Martha that this has been a recurring issue with their youth action board, which is unfortunate because they do provide financial stipends, but it still happens, that turnover still happens. And I think we were all youth once. Maybe some of us still are. I cannot claim that anymore. And it is definitely a different, you're at a different stability point in your life at that moment that doesn't always translate into consistent participation. So understood. Yeah. Any other comments, questions? Folks want to come off mute and have a conversation? Otherwise, we will wrap up. Okay, not seeing any. Thank you for joining us today. We will be back at it next week, same time and same station. Thank you so much for your time, your energy, and your thoughts today. Be well. We'll see you next week.